I'm Clarence Horton. On behalf of Cabarrus County and the organizations that work to preserve her heritage and her history, welcome to another video installment in our history of Old Cabarrus and her people. Almost all of us, while driving on our busy highways or waiting in traffic, have seen the silver and black aluminum markers which line the highways of North Carolina and point us to some of the important persons and events which chronicle our history. In 1935, the North Carolina General Assembly passed an act to provide for the erection of markers at places of historical interest along our highways. An advisory committee composed of faculty members from the state's leading colleges and universities advised on the matters of importance that should be marked. As a result, in January 1936, the first marker was erected in Granville County to honor the memory and home place of John Penn, one of the three signers of the Declaration of Independence from North Carolina. In 1939, the first edition of the Guide to North Carolina Historical Markers was published and told the story of the first 218 markers. The 10th edition of that guide was published in 2007, and we find that there are now more than 1,500 markers in North Carolina, stretching from the mountains to the sea. Every county has at least one marker. As you might imagine, Wake County, the capital of the state, leads in 77 markers. Here in Old Cabarrus, 21 markers have been erected over the past years, and they serve as a brief thumbnail sketch of the history of this county. Not everyone is mentioned on those markers. Under the rules established by the Advisory Commission, a marker cannot be erected until 25 years have passed since the death of a person or the happening of an event. That gives the committee a chance to evaluate the importance of that person or that event in light of the entire history of the state. Our markers begin with the oldest chronicling the trading path by which our first settlers came to this county, and the newest ends with the marker erected in 1996 to the memory of Charles A. Cannon at the time of Concord's bicentennial celebration. We might wonder why all of our historic churches and cemeteries and other local institutions are not marked. But due to the number of those places, the Advisory Committee decided early on to limit the markers to matters of statewide importance and eliminate those of merely local or regional importance. Private groups may still erect markers, as for example the Kannapolis Cemetery Association did in marking the historic Old Baker Cemetery on West C Street in Kannapolis. The only requirements are that the private markers not bear the state seal and not be located on the highway right-of-way. The Advisory Committee also decided early to cast the markers out of aluminum, both for durability and visibility. Rather than the dense lines of text usually found on the old bronze markers, the present markers are limited to 5 or 6 lines and to only a few characters per line so that passing motorists can more easily read them. We'll begin our survey of the markers erected in Cabarrus County with the marker on South Union Street, which marks the location of the old Indian trading path. In the 17th century, the old colonial trading path ran from Petersburg in Virginia, generally across North Carolina, and down the Piedmont to the home of the Catawba and Waxhaw Indians in South Carolina. Early in the 18th century, companies of Irish Presbyterians and German settlers traveled down the Great Wagon Road from their homes in Pennsylvania through the Valley of Virginia and settled in the backcountry of North Carolina. They crossed the Yadkin River on the old trading ford crossing, which was located in an area where the river was a little more shallow and had a hard bottom. We can still see that spot today as we cross the Yadkin on the great I-85 bridges north of Salisbury. The trading path ran through Cabarrus County and generally crossed the county at a location on South Union Street at its intersection of Wilshire Drive, where the present historical marker is erected. In traveling to present-day Cabarrus County, our settlers covered a vast area of property in the northern part of the colony of North Carolina, which was owned by Lord Carteret, the Earl of Granville. Early in North Carolina history, King Charles II gave a vast grant of property in the New World to 8 of his loyal supporters, which history calls the Lords Proprietors. That territory included the present states of North and South Carolina and Georgia. The only requirement was that those men settle that area with settlers so that they could farm the land and produce products for the English Navy and pay taxes. Unfortunately, they were very unsuccessful in that endeavor, and the king threatened to take back the grant. 7 of the 8 proprietors surrendered their portions of the grant for a small payment in order to avoid the king reclaiming the grant at no payment. Only the Earl of Granville insisted on retaining his 1/8 interest. In return, he was deeded a vast area of North Carolina running across the northern portion of the state. The southern boundary was the present southern boundary of Rowan County and northern boundary of Cabarrus County. In 1938, a Granville Grant marker was erected along the Rowan-Cabarrus line on U.S. Highway 29 in the Jackson Park area of North Kannapolis. Large companies of immigrants from Ireland first arrived in our section of the state in the 1740s, although there are some reports that scattered settlers arrived earlier during the prior decade. They tended to settle in the western and southwestern portions of the county in the Rocky River Valley, where the land was richer. They built homes and erected churches. They were staunch Presbyterians, and they sought ministers in the early part of their settlement. Later on, they began to erect church buildings in the early 1750s. Both Poplar Tent and Rocky River claim beginning dates during those early years of the 1750s. The earliest minister to serve the Rocky River congregation was Alexander Craighead, who came in 1758. In 1971, an historical marker was erected along Rocky River Road to mark the location of the historic church and its cemeteries. The 1860 historic sanctuary of the church still stands at that location. The German immigrants, who also traveled the Great Wagon Road from Pennsylvania, arrived in the Cabarrus County area close behind the first Irish Presbyterian settlers, and they amiably settled in the portions of the land to the east of the Great Wagon Road. Being thrifty farmers, they thrived there, raising small grain and raising animals. They were generally people of the Lutheran and Reformed faiths, and they tended to worship together in those early days. They built the Dutch Buffalo Creek Church about 1745 near the creek that gave the church its name. A monument to that church still stands to this day. It was a union church, as both Lutheran and Reformed congregations worshiped there together. The people at St. John's Lutheran Church in Cabarrus County trace their heritage to the early Dutch Buffalo Creek Church, as do the Reformed people who settled in the same areas but worshiped in other locations later on. Reverend Adolph Nussman was the first minister called to serve St. John's Lutheran Church on a regular basis. In 1845, the people of St. John's built their present historic sanctuary, which still stands to this day. The sanctuary is marked by a historical marker along US 73 at its intersection with St. John's Road, about 300 yards from the church. The Reformed people also claim the old Dutch Buffalo Creek Church as their home church and date their beginnings to 1745. A marker commemorating the Bethel Bear Creek Reformed Church, now the Bethel United Church of Christ, is located in the far eastern edge of Cabarrus County on Highway 49 at its intersection with Lentz Road. The church itself, however, is located a few miles away, just inside the edge of Stanley County. The original sanctuary for Bethel Church was erected in 1806, with the present building, which is still standing, being erected in 1929. The survival of the Reformed Church in the area of Rowan, Cabarrus, and Stanley counties is due in large part to the ministry of one Samuel Souther. Reverend Souther, who migrated with his family from Switzerland, unfortunately lost most of his family in a great storm off the coast of the Americas. Reverend Souther traveled to Philadelphia and, being trained in the German language, taught school there for a number of years. He again migrated to the area of North and South Carolina and became a Reformed minister. We find him first preaching at the Coldwater Union Church at a service attended by the Governor William Tryon. Later, we find Souther preaching in other Reformed churches in both Rowan and Cabarrus County. During the American Revolution, Souther was a patriot, and for that reason, his homestead and many of the buildings in Guilford County were burned by British troops. After the Revolution, Souther resumed preaching both in South Carolina and North Carolina, preached at the churches in Rowan and Cabarrus County until 1782, when he finally retired to South Carolina, where he later died. Many of his descendants, however, remain in Cabarrus County and still live here to this day. An historical marker honoring the life and achievements of Reverend Souther was erected in 1970 along North Carolina Highway 73, near its intersection with Gold Hill Road and only a short distance from the present location of Coldwater Lutheran Church. One of the early German families prominent in both the business and civic and social and political life of Cabarrus County were the family of Martin Pfeiffer Sr. Martin Sr., his sons Martin Jr., Caleb, and John were all Revolutionary War patriots. Tragically, John died at an early age in the first days of the war. Martin Jr. went on to serve under General George Washington, and later Washington visited his home. John and Martin Jr. both had a home and tavern, which we today call Red Hill, located about 1.5 miles from the intersection of Poplar Tent Road and US 29601. There they entertained guests and also participated in land transactions. Both Governor William Tryon and President George Washington were entertained at their tavern home at Red Hill. It became a noted stopping spot for people who were traveling along the Great Wagon Road from Salisbury to destinations in the South. A marker was erected to commemorate Red Hill Tavern at the intersection of Poplar Tent Road and US 29601, about 1.5 miles east of the former location of the Pfeiffer Tavern. During the American Revolution, other German colonists came to the Americas, but came against their wills. King George III, who was in desperate need of soldiers, contracted for mercenaries with his brother-in-law, the Landgraf Friedrich in Germany, and he sent large numbers of German soldiers from Hesse Castle. Because of their home, they were given the familiar name of Hessians. Many of those soldiers deserted during the war and found friendly German colonies which welcomed them. One of those Hessian deserters, a man named John Reed, came to the area which later became the eastern part of Cabarrus County. John bought land along Meadow Creek in eastern North Carolina. One memorable Sunday, John Reed's son Conrad was fishing with a bow and arrow when he discovered an odd-looking, very heavy nugget in the waters of Meadow Creek. He brought it home and it was used as a doorstop for several years. Eventually, it was learned that the nugget was in fact a large nugget of almost pure gold. And John Reed and several of his partners began to explore the creeks along his property, at least during times when he was not planting and harvesting his crops. A gold rush began in the area. Gold mines were dug in Mecklenburg, Cabarrus, and Stanley counties. As a result, the United States constructed a mint in the Charlotte area in order to coin the gold which was being mined in this region of North Carolina. From the discovery of that first large nugget by Conrad Reed in 1799 until the discovery of gold in California, the Cabarrus County region was the largest producer of gold in the United States. A marker commemorating the Reed Gold Mine is now located on Highway 2427, a short distance from the mine. The mine itself is now one of the most visited and highly visible tourist destinations in North Carolina. Old Cabarrus County is the home for one of the early North Carolina governors, Governor Nathaniel Alexander. Alexander was born in that area of Cabarrus, which is now the Lowe's Motor Speedway, on a plantation owned by his father, Moses Alexander, a magistrate for the crown. Alexander's father died, unfortunately, and his mother remarried a patriot named Robert Smith. Alexander was reared on that plantation, which became known as Smithfield, and which was visited by President George Washington during his term in office. Alexander served as a surgeon himself during the Revolution. Nathaniel Alexander served as governor of North Carolina from 1805 through 1807. He also served as a congressman from his district. An historical marker honoring his achievements was erected along North Carolina Highway 49 in Harrisburg, about 3 miles from the present location of Lowe's Motor Speedway. Cabarrus County also gave a governor to the new state of Alabama. Israel Pickens was born in 1780 in the Odell School section of Cabarrus County. He was educated at nearby Poplarton Academy. A son of Revolutionary War patriots, Pickens served as a congressman from North Carolina. He then moved to the new lands of Alabama, where he served as governor from 1821 through 1825. He was then appointed to the U.S. Senate. Unfortunately, he died of illness in 1827, his brilliant career cut short. An historical marker honoring his life and achievements has been erected near Odell School at the intersection of North Carolina 73. Marker was dedicated at a ceremony in 1991, attended by many of the school children from nearby Odell School. Most of the children were enthralled by the presence of Revolutionary War reenactor Bob Boynton, dressed in full costume. This concludes the first segment of our study of the historical markers of Cabarrus County and the persons and events that they represent. We hope you'll join us for the second segment, in which we'll deal with those markers that commemorate events in more recent days. For further information on the historical markers or to obtain a proposal for a new marker, look at the project website at www.ncmarkers.com. We're glad you joined us as we continue to turn the yellowed pages of the history of this special place, this Cabarrus. We hope to see you again real soon.